Hey folks, welcome back to the show. We have a fantastic episode for you today. We are solving for, hang on, wait for it, deep sleep specifically. A lot of people talk about helping people to sleep, which is great, but we all know that sleep quality is really what we're all after. And particularly when it comes to longevity, cognitive health, metabolic health, the whole nine yards. So that's what the episode's about. Before we jump into the episode, of course, I really want to thank you guys for being here and would love to encourage you to sign up for the newsletter so that you can get your hands on that great 8-part series of all of the foundation work that I do with my clients before we get into the more advanced biohacking or health optimization strategies. So all you have to do that is go to natnidham.com and sign up for the newsletter at the top of the page. And while you're there, you can check out the Nat Recommend section, which is a great way to find some of the products that I recommend, but more importantly, links to the podcast where we talk about those products. And finally, if you love this episode or if you found that you're getting value from it, please make sure to share it with your friends and networks and leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to it on. Let's talk about this episode a little bit. So I gave you a hint at the beginning. We are solving for deep sleep. My guest is Dr. Dan Cohen, a neurologist and sleep technology expert. And he has been researching and going at this problem now for 17 years. And this is a man who holds several patents related to EEGs and sleep analysis algorithms and devices. So he developed the technology that allows sleep labs to analyze all that data that's produced when people go in for a sleep study. So this man knows sleep, but he also figured out very early in the game that if we don't address stress, then sleep's not really nothing much is going to move the needle on sleep. So it's a really fabulous conversation. We do talk about technology that he has developed and what this technology does. And this is really interesting. I've never really heard of technology that can do this particularly, but it's based on magnets. And it's a wearable. See, I'm kind of looking for words here because I'm trying to explain this to you. It's a device on the floor. It's a wearable. They communicate with each other. And together, what they do is they get the parts of your brain that are responsible for getting you into a parasympathetic state. So that's rest and digest. So you can get into deep sleep. They will communicate with each other and send out a frequency to your brainstem and get it resonating at the frequency needed to help you get into deep sleep. So this is full on brain entrainment. There's a lot more to it than that. It's not telling your brain what to do. It's working with you, and it's working through a wearable watch that you only wear when you go to bed and a device that sits at your feet. So I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to let you guys learn about it in the episode. Suffice to say, it is super, super fascinating and really interesting technology. I'm literally just getting started with it now. And I'm using it. I started off using it for stress, and now I'm starting, as of last night, I started using it for sleep, and I will report back to you guys on my experience. But the person who referred me to Dr. Dan Cohen is a good friend of mine who's been using this technology for 2 years, and he raves about it, as do many other people. So if you want to learn more about the technology and you think you might want to invest in it for yourself, after you listen to the podcast, you can go to soltechhealth.com/longevity. And that will take you to the website where you can learn more about it. And also by going with that /longevity, you will be able to save some money on your purchase. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the show, Dr. Dan Cohen. It is a pleasure to have you here today.
Oh, very nice to be with you, Nat.
Yeah, well, this is, first of all, I get to thank you because for the last 5 days, I've been spending 30 minutes on average, chilling out, relaxing on my bed with my feet kind of all tingly, which has been really an interesting experience. And just actually the beginning of my adventure with this technology that we're going to talk about today. But, I think that in this day and age, we can't spend enough time talking about um, the interplay between stress and sleep and how this affects people in a million different ways. But before we get into that, I would love to invite you to kind of share a little bit of your story. I mean, you've got a really interesting trajectory that you've followed to get to where we are today here on this conversation. And I'd just like to hand the mic to you and fill the audiences on who Dr. Dan Cohen is and why we're sitting here talking about magnetism and stress and sleep and all the things.
Okay, I will try to keep it short, but if I go too long, shut me up.
I'll
Okay.
cut you off.
Okay,
People
good.
know I can cut people off, but I try not to.
Okay. Well, ever since I was a teenager, I was fascinated with the difference between brain and mind.
Mm,
And so I decided, okay, maybe I should be a doctor and either, choose between psychiatry and neurology, you know. And when I got into medical school, I said, you know what? I said, psychiatry is a little too strange for me, you know.
I'm going with the brain.
I'm going exactly. I'll start with the basics.
Start with the hardware.
Right, precisely. That's a good way to look at it.
Hmm.
And as I got into medical school, and then I went into neurology and did my residency, and I became board certified, I decided that, frankly, there wasn't that much good I could do practicing neurology. You could make a lot of diagnoses,
Hmm.
but back then in the early 80s, there wasn't that great treatment modalities so that you could really help people that much. I mean, you could do
Okay.
some good, but it was frustrating from that standpoint. And so I thought I'd rather go into product development. And so I started a business right away. We made the first automated brainwave monitor to help prevent strokes during high risk surgery. And then we took that hardware into sleep labs and we pioneered the development of automated sleep. And that was nice because we saw the sleep field grow from 300 labs globally to 3,000, because we had
Wow.
automated the process. And then we
So, sorry, you'd automated the process of analyzing the data that was being collected through the sleep study, right? Is that
that's exactly right. I mean, they
okay?
were collecting essentially a full night's sleep data, and they were doing it. They were recording it on paper, and so from like an EEG machine. Okay,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it was half a mile of paper, and a
Wow.
technician the next morning had to start leafing through and score every page every 30 seconds.
That sounds like a
Of
great job.
Yeah, and it took 4 to 6 hours.
Right.
So we were able to, in a matter of a few years, get that time from 4 to 6 hours down to a minute. So
So it's almost like that first iteration of AI
yeah, yeah,
back in
ex-
the day, right?
exactly. And it was a fun project for us because we got to take all the physiology and we got to do all the algorithms and see all those results. And the sleep labs loved it. And we got to do things for them that they couldn't do before because they
Hmm.
didn't have automation and they didn't
Right.
have an ability to analyze stuff in that level of detail. So that was really nice. And then, frankly, I saw that the business wasn't going to grow that much, and we were already a public company. So I ended up doing something that my board thought was crazy. I licensed what they called a nose band-aid, and that became the Breathe Right nasal strip. So we launched that, and the business grew nicely, and then we ended up selling it to GlaxoSmithKline.
Right.
And but one of the things that haunted me was what I learned in medical school. I mean, they taught us that 75 to 90% of all medical illnesses are either caused by or made worse by stress, particularly chronic stress.
Interesting.
And that was shocking. And I would ask my professors, I'd say, well, wait a minute. I said, if this is that big a problem, why aren't we treating chronic stress as a primary pathology? Why don't we put
Hmm.
all of our efforts into it if it's causing that many problems? And you know what? They had good answers. I mean, their answers were, wait a minute, this comes from a part of the brain that we can't get at. It's not like we can put a pacemaker there and regulate, parasympathetic from sympathetic, which are the two major divisions of the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic's known for fight or flight. Parasympathetic is known for rest and digest. And you really
Mhm.
want to have a lot of parasympathetic activity to relax and not have chronic stress. And so uh, we couldn't do anything electrically, or electromagnetically in that area. Um, Drugs, kind of out of the question, because this is such a primitive area of the nervous system
Mm.
that as the nervous system evolved layer upon layer, it used some of the same neurotransmitters and neuroreceptors as in this more primitive area. And as a result, they spread throughout the brain. So imagine the level of, complications, side effects you would have from a drug that would attack this area.
Hmm.
So, pharmaceuticals, not really a good idea. So you're left with behavioral techniques like meditation, relaxation. And there's two problems with that. First of all, people that are stressed don't have the time or take the time to become good enough at those methods to have
Right.
them, do enough good. You know, so that was a problem. And to get really good at it is really tough. I mean, you've got yogis sitting on a mountaintop for 20 years. you know,
Well, I think it takes commitment, and there are people that are able to access it for sure,
yeah,
but not as many as needed.
no,
And but to go back to the medications, I mean, we do have. I mean, medicine has made attempts. I mean, we're talking about whether it's a sleep drug or it's an SSRI or antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and I think sadly, what the conclusion that we're all being brought to currently is in most if in most cases, the lion's share of cases, these things, even if they work for a little while, eventually just stop working for people, and they're not a solution, right? So it's
you're correct. And here's the other thing that most people don't realize. I mean, you mentioned sleep, and I'll get back to anxiety in a second.
mhm,
But when you take a sleep drug, you know, is that putting you to sleep or is that knocking you out?
100%. Well, it makes a mess of your sleep architecture, right? Which we'll get into at some point
Right,
later in our conversation. But
right. I mean, in essence, it's sedating the cerebrum, which is not the center of sleep. Sleep,
mhm.
let me show you my brain. Okay.
So for those of you listening, we're looking at a sagittal section. Is that sagittal? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Basically somebody whose head's been chopped in half here, but not a person, just a dummy.
right.
With
And
respect to the dummy.
and so this right at the bottom of the skull. So this is not part of the cerebral hemispheres. This is called the brain stem. And
Hmm.
this area, which is sort of right in the middle and right at the lies along the bottom of the skull, and this area is called or contains the autonomic nervous system, as I mentioned, sympathetic,
Right.
parasympathetic. And the parasympathetic division actually controls, it's the pacemaker of the different sleep stages.
Right.
So you have
This
to
is the rest and
stimulate,
digest, isn't it? Yeah.
yes, those areas in order to cause sleep to develop normally. And what sleeping pills do is they tend to affect the cerebral cortex, which essentially causes sedation.
Mm,
You know,
okay.
it's the same thing. You go in for surgery, and the anesthesiologist says, "Well, I'm going to put you to sleep now." And no, well, I'm going to knock you out, is what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
and anxiety is similar. I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to mask the symptoms. We're
Hmm.
not going to take care of the cause. So you can take anti-anxiety drugs, but yet all the stress-related conditions can still persist.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. There was a survey done, American Academy of Family Physicians in the US, and they essentially reported the same kind of facts. They said 75 to 90% of their office visits were due to stress.
Wow.
Right. I mean,
That's
think
amazing.
about that. I mean,
Yeah.
we spend as a country 18% of our GDP is spent on healthcare.
Hmm.
What could that cost be reduced to if we could solve chronic stress?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I wanted to do was say, okay, can we solve this problem? I had been very fortunate. I did very well with that first business. And so my partner and I committed a lot of funds to do some primary research on stress. And our goal was, can we solve this thing safely and non-invasively? And we knew the thing was going to be such a hard task that we named the company Round River Research Corp, because we knew that it was going to be like navigating a round river, and we're going to have to go round and around and around in order to
Hmm.
make enough discoveries to solve this. And you know what? Unfortunately, that was prophetic. It took us 17 years before we made our first big discovery.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's persistence.
Yeah, well, we were determined, and I'm actually kind of a boring person, so it was okay.
You were enjoying the circular nature. Well, I mean, I don't know that I would put it as boring. I think maybe you're a little persistent.
Yeah, yeah, that I am. and
Hmm.
and it was fascinating, because I remember that first discovery when all of a sudden it hit. And we had been practicing all these different techniques that we were actually good at: meditation and profound relaxation. But what was interesting about this was, instead of you having to pay attention to it and actually focus on it, this did it to you.
Mm,
And so that was a big plus, because we had developed a technology earlier that people had to devote 3 hours a week to. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday they had to do an hour. And
yeah.
guess what? People wouldn't take the time to do it after a while.
Hmm. No,
Yeah.
an hour is a long time. And it's interesting, I think in some ways, well, I think an hour a day is tough for most people.
Right.
And then an hour every other day gets really easy to forget,
Yes.
right? Because it's not an
Precisely.
embedded habit.
Right.
So,
Although you could feel the stuff coming back, you could feel the problems coming back, because it had a half life of like 24 hours. So it worked for like 36 hours. And you basically, all you did was sit in a lounge chair, and it played this multi layered music. And you also felt the vibrations. So it was very pleasant, but it was something that you couldn't do anything else during that time.
yeah. Well, and
Okay.
for, like if you think about it, like a parent with small kids running around, like
Right.
it's
Forget it.
it's unfeasible.
Right.
It's not accessible, let's
Right.
just say, for most people.
Right. So we gave up on that. And then we said, okay, we've got to find a different way to do it. And when I was, in training, there were two ways to affect the nervous system. One was practical, which we used for the lounge, provide a stimulus on a constant level that was boring, and it would turn off the brain. Okay, essentially. I mean,
Okay.
there's a little more to it than that, and that's called habituation. But there was a
Hmm.
theoretical technique called entrainment, which is find a way to entrain, to activate or support, you know, the activity of that particular part of the brain that was important to provide that function. But that was theoretical. And so it's like nobody had ever done it before. So we said, you know what, if we're gonna make this work, we got to figure out a way to do that.
Hmm.
And we were able to, but it took that amount of time.
So let's talk a little bit about what entrainment means exactly and how it relates to, because we've talked about two issues here. I mean, the number of people who have dysregulated sleep, they either can't fall asleep, they can't stay asleep, or they're sleeping, but they get up in the morning, and if they have a wearable, their wearable's telling them, yeah, maybe you were sleeping, but frankly, it sucked. Like you didn't get enough deep sleep, you didn't get enough this sleep. And I've talked to people all the time who are increasingly frustrated with this whole thing. And half the time the wearable ends up out the window because, as we're going to talk about it, a lot of these wearables, like the value to me of the wearable is information, right?
Yes.
So if I apply an intervention, whether it's a supplement or a lifestyle habit or whatever the case may be, I'm hoping over time to see that reflected in some way, shape, or form in my sleep stats. But let's talk a little bit about the role of entrainment when we're talking about sleep and or stress. Like I'm not sure where entrainment's coming in on the technology, so maybe let's dissect that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Well, when you want a simple explanation of entrainment, think about a tuning fork.
Okay.
So if you have two tuning forks that operate at the same frequency, if you just activate one of them and start to bring it closer to the other without even touching it, the other starts to vibrate, because
That's
the, the,
entrainment.
the
Okay.
waves in the air cause that one to resonate, because that one is tuned to resonate at that frequency.
I love
Okay.
it. Okay, it's perfect
Okay.
explanation.
All right.
Okay.
So that's entrainment, like you said. And so we had to look at what are the frequencies of the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system located in that brainstem. Okay. And so, fortunately, there was a company called HeartMath that had been
Yeah,
doing
I know heart math.
research. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were doing research in that area back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And they had done a nice job of looking at the frequencies of heart rate variability. And that was the first clue because they helped define the frequency range of the autonomic nervous system. And it's lower, much lower than brainwaves, because it's a much more primitive area of the nervous system.
Okay.
So the frequencies were all the way down to zero point zero zero 0.003 cycles per second to zero point 0.4 cycles per second. And people with research had sort of divided sympathetic, parasympathetic, and then there was this very, very low band that didn't have a name. But even the parasympathetic, sympathetic was a little bit wishy-washy in terms of there was an overlap. So what we had to do is we had to start doing research in that area and play with different frequencies. And what we learned was when you're down at these low frequencies, you have to use magnetism versus electromagnetism in order to get the pure frequency. Okay,
Mm.
because electromagnetism, there's a problem at very low frequencies in terms of creating too much heat. Equipment doesn't like that.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
okay,
Okay.
see, so, there is a way around it, but it's not pure low frequency. And so we used magnetism and we started to create magnetic fields with the frequencies that were in that range. And then we had to fine tune it. And we finally figured out, in this tiny little range, this produces two things. And so this was kind of nice. At this range, you not only produced, very significant relaxation, but that same frequency range also produced deep sleep.
Hmm.
But it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
for
because
sure.
in deep sleep, your physical body is the most relaxed.
Yeah.
So that was important. But we also learned that, hey, you know what? That's not the same frequency range for dream sleep, for REM, rapid eye movement sleep. And so we realized that, we have to play with a lot of different frequencies, to get this right. And so ultimately we had to make our own wearable that would look at heart rate variability in the frequency domain because the other wearables don't do that because it takes too much battery life. And so we had to play around with that concept. And then we started to get units out in the field and to test people. And to my surprise, it didn't work perfectly in everybody. And I thought it was such a small bandwidth. I said, this should work the same. This is such a primitive area in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I put my white jacket back on and, played
Yeah.
doctor, you know, and I found that the people that it didn't work well on had essentially PTSD or severe stress. And they needed a lower frequency that was closer to the sympathetic range, fight or flight, because that's the only way they felt comfortable operating. So it had to be a little bit higher than that. And so that was much lower than what I was giving everybody else.
So if we could, so pause there for a second. So using magnetic field, you're offering a vibration to the brain that you're entraining it. You're just like the pitchforks, the tuning
Mhm.
forks. That was such a good analogy, actually. So just like the tuning forks, you're basically inviting the brain to resonate at that particular frequency, which is where we know, or or you discovered and learn that that's where the frequency the brain needs to be at in order for a person to be in that relaxed state so that they can get that restorative sleep. Is that
That's precisely correct. And
okay?
and so, but because, you
But so
know,
sorry. So, but one more thing. So then, for people who have had trauma or are in that heightened stress state, their brainstem or that center of the brain is not resonating at. They're not able to get to that frequency, and so the spread is too wide. Where when you offer that frequency to their brain, it can't be entrained because they're too far out of the range. Is that
that
roughly right?
that is, and what we
Okay.
call that is what is the individual's resonant frequency?
Okay.
Where do they need to resonate in order to have the beneficial effect. And that's why for sleep, what we need to do is we go through a 5-night calibration process to
Mm-hmm.
find out, okay, we need to personalize this for the individual to find their resonant frequency.
Okay.
But we had to do similar things in the beginning just because, your sleep stages don't operate at the same frequencies. So we had to, that's one of the reasons why we had to develop our own wearable. So we would know what sleep stage you're moving into or you're in order to provide you the right frequencies for where you're at in your sleep cycle.
So your technology doesn't dictate the sleep cycle. Like it doesn't guide people through sleep cycles. All it's doing is it's helping your brain to be in that proper resonance for the sleep cycle that it's in.
Yes, and
Okay.
and and that's a very, very important distinction because
Mhm.
you know you're going to have your own sleep cycle. Okay,
Mhm.
we can't override that. That's not the way to do it. We have to support you, not
Right.
override. Okay, and so we, in essence, provide the frequencies that are going to that you decide to operate. Subconsciously. In
Right.
terms of your autonomic nervous system, but you've decided based on past traumas, whatever, that you're going to operate along this spectrum at a particular set of a small bandwidth of frequencies. And so we support you by supplying those frequencies to, again, you're already surrounded by the Earth's magnetic field. All we're
Yeah.
doing is adding these frequencies. Think of it like a supplement.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we're supplementing the frequencies that your brainstem wants to operate at, and supporting that. And it's an interesting process because
Mhm.
you'd say I'm sure your audience is thinking, well, wait a minute, then this should work right away. But no. you know
No.
what we found is it takes weeks to months for your brain to then change enough, because as we age we lose neurons.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Mhm.
you lose nerve cells, and so in the process, we support you with the right frequencies, so that your brain can regrow those cells. Because what we've learned over the past 30 years is the brain's very dynamic, and if you
Mhm.
stimulate a particular area, guess what? It grows back, and so
That's
we
so
can
cool.
right
Yeah.
we can restore deep sleep, which is really nice because guess what? We lose that as we age, and that is the most important stage of sleep for enhancing health.
Yeah. So for the people, I have a question. For people that are in that heightened, I guess more vigilant state. So they've experienced trauma, they've got some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. So, and I think you had explained this to me when we were speaking earlier, and I'm correct me if I didn't understand it properly. So their brainstem is resonating at a different frequency than someone who hasn't had that kind of trauma. And so the technology is going to kind of look to match that frequency. But isn't that frequency the frequency of hypervigilance? Like, is the goal eventually to help them to relax so that the frequency is more in line with a rest and digest frequency? Or, like, you know what I mean? Like, are you kind of meeting them where they at and then helping them over time to travel to a better place? You're smiling and
Uh,
nodding, so I think
well,
I'm kind of getting there. Or I'm
you're
so far off base that you're like, "Oh, she's so cute." No.
no, no. The fact is, you're so smart that you can ask the question. Uh, no, it's a great it's a great question, and you're touching on the right concept. All right,
Okay.
you have to ask yourself. Let's pick somebody who was abused as a child.
Okay.
Okay, and they have PTSD, and where on this bandwidth of sympathetic parasympathetic are these people going to feel comfortable living at?
Mm,
Okay, so why are they hypervigilant? Because they only feel comfortable when they know that they're somewhat in control of their environment.
yeah.
So they're constantly, I mean, when I started to meet with these people that, weren't performing well with our technology, the first thing I notice is they're not spending their time looking at me. They're spending their time looking at me and then looking left and looking right. I mean, they're all over the map because they're
Right.
hypervigilant. Is there any danger coming?
Mhm.
So it's not that they can't operate at these higher frequencies, it's that they don't want to.
Yeah.
They need to stay closer to the sympathetic to make sure they're aware whether or not they're in danger.
Right. Yeah, makes
Okay.
perfect sense.
Okay. And so, will they start to shift over time? We don't know, but we believe that will probably happen. And that's why in our technology, we've put in an auto resf function. So it's always checking to see whether or not your frequency is shifting so that we can give you the frequency you need.
Right. And so I guess for those people, getting that frequency to shift over time is going to be predicated on getting to a place where they feel safe, maybe doing some therapy or doing the work that, I mean, ideally, hopefully they're out of that environment that they were in that created the situation. But, I think what's really interesting here is understanding that what this technology is intended to do is help you to get the restorative sleep that you need for all the reasons that we know that you need restorative sleep. If you've had past traumas, it's still going to be important to address the traumas in whatever way you can. Excuse me.
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. And what we've seen is that some of the people that do have PTSD use it, and then they start to get better, and then all of a sudden the underlying psychological trauma starts coming to the surface, and
Hmm.
that is when you need to start going to therapy,
Yeah.
because you need to uncover it and you need to deal with it. You need
Yeah.
to acknowledge it and you need to work through it. And you need,
Hmm.
the funny thing is, it's actually not funny, it's very sad. Um, you know, everybody, every human being does not does not love themselves enough, does not think highly enough of themselves. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because, every one of us to some extent has had some level of trauma, even if it was mild.
Right.
So there's a common theme here that the ego has. And this is a part of the mind that comes from the brain. Okay. This part of the mind has been trained that no, you're not good enough.
Hmm.
Okay, everybody has this, unless you're some sort of guru, some sort of
Or
yogi
done the work.
master.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you've got to get past that, and so that's a common theme. But these people with PTSD have it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So the idea here really is to, wherever an individual is, help them to get restorative sleep so that, number one, if you're one of the fortunate people that hasn't had any major trauma, we know that the outcome of great sleep is better metabolic health, better cardiovascular health, better cognitive health, better all the things, right? I mean, if we want, in this space of longevity and health span, if we want to talk about getting younger as we get older, we're going to have to learn to sleep like we did when we were younger
Mhm.
to be able to access those repair mechanisms in the body.
Well, that's right, because when you look at the statistics that come out of insurance companies,
Mm,
and so you're dealing with studies that involve tens of millions of people. Okay,
right.
so the results are absolutely, profoundly accurate. All right, and it involves money, so they're paying attention.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly. Yeah.
and what you see is as we age, particularly as we get older than 55, the number of chronic illnesses start to rise per
Hmm.
person.
Hmm.
And look, it's a biologic countdown towards, bye bye. You know,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
going to get sick. But what is also happening as you age? You're losing deep sleep,
Hmm.
and we all know, just as you said, that getting deep sleep prevents these illnesses. Okay. So, as far as I look at it, I look at it two ways. One is, can restoring deep sleep help you live longer? Answer is, I don't know.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
But I mean, there might be some other mechanism that says, no, sorry, you were born to live a certain amount of time and that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't speak to that. But wouldn't it be nice if there is a clock that says, okay, you're going to die when you're 90? Wouldn't it be nice to live a healthy life until you're 90?
Exactly. I think that, and that's, and you've hit it there is, can getting deep sleep help you to be healthier, more vital, and get more out of the whatever life it is that you have. And it's the evidence on all of this, whether it's studies or talking to people, and it's as basic as, are you going to have carb cravings the next day? Are you going to be thinking clearly enough to make the right decisions when you need to the next day? Are you going to be in full possession of your faculties and not blow your stack at the least little thing? It all has to do with your sleep. And it's interesting to me that so many people's sleep is dysregulated, and it's such an elusive, um it's so amorphous, because as you said, it's a hardware issue but a software issue at the same time. And that's where your technology comes in. Is it addresses the hardware, being the vibration, but that is ultimately what allows the software, being the mind, to kind of get into that, allow the body to get into that state where it can restore itself.
Yes, you still need both, and
Exactly.
and if you want to abuse your body and not sleep because God knows for what reason, then I'm sorry, you can't recover your deep sleep.
Hmm.
In that situation.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it appears for certain that this technology can restore your deep sleep. I mean,
Okay.
when I started using it, I was getting 20 minutes of deep sleep. Now, on average, I get an hour and a half. So,
Nice.
right. So I sleep like I'm a 25-year-old and I'm 72. And from the studies we've done, I mean, the last time we looked at our database, where people were using it long enough. Okay.
So what is long enough? How long do you
Well,
feel it takes to,
but and it depends on
and it
how
depends
bad
on
your
the
brain
person.
is and how
Yeah.
old you are.
Yeah.
So, so obviously, um, if you're an athlete, let's say you're a football player and you're in your 20s, guess what? Your sleep's going to deteriorate even by your 30s.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to start using it in your 20s to prevent that from happening so you can play longer and be healthier. Because let's take a second and look at deep sleep. Deep sleep causes cell repair, cell regeneration, even DNA repair.
Hmm.
It impacts your endocrine system. Um, One of the biggest features is what it does to your immune system.
Hmm.
It bolsters that to help fight off infections, cancer, etc. And deep sleep is believed by some to clear a plaque in nerve cells, which cause dementia, for
Hmm.
instance. And so
Hmm.
it goes on and on and on and on. And obviously, if you get good sleep, your level of stress is going to be lower the next day. So your chances of preventing a lot of stress related illnesses get better, but that can also be supplemented by some daytime use, again, without devoting attention right to that. I mean,
Yeah.
you can use it while you're reading, use it while you're answering emails, etc. So you don't have to pay attention, but we should touch on the feeling part, as
Absolutely.
we get on. But
Yeah.
it's really important to, okay, you can use this technology, but if you don't want to practice reasonable, sleep tips, then you got a problem there. I mean,
Yeah, no, so this doesn't, exactly. I mean, this doesn't take away the fact that we want to practice good sleep hygiene. We want to finish eating a couple good 2 to 3 hours before bed. We want to, avoid screens, and for the love of God, avoid the news before
right,
you go to bed. Like all those smart things. You might
yeah,
still do well to take some magnesium, let's say,
yeah,
and maybe use melatonin if that's your thing. Like all of those things are still true, but none of those things, I think, actually get to
no,
the depth of addressing the issue like this technology does, which we're going to stop saying this technology in a minute and kind of explain to you guys what it is. But I mean, you've alluded to it already a couple of times, but you know, I think that but I will say that I have seen so many people in my communities who are doing all those other sleep things and still can't get past that 20-minute mark on the deep sleep. They're still stuck. And when you talk about the football players, and it doesn't have to be as extreme as that, are you talking about people who've had any kind of TBI,
um,
essentially? Like, which,
no. I'm talking about regular people. Your deep sleep starts to decline.
oh, yeah. No,
Yeah,
but you were talking about football players in their 20s. Like, these
yeah,
are guys that are, they're
yeah,
sustaining hits to their head
yeah. Oh yeah,
probably years before that, right? Because
yeah,
they start training as football players as kids. And so, and you've got all kinds of athletes out there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've got the athlete population and then you've got regular people population.
Right.
So,
Right. My assumption is, and this is only an assumption because it has not been tested, we know that there is uh, neuroplasticity, which means
mhm,
neural circuits do change depending on activity. We've seen already that we can restore deep sleep. So I think there's a very high likelihood that with continued use, you're going to end up with this growth in neural tissue as you need it, particularly if your daytime activities promote stimulus to the brain to actually grow in this direction. It's
right.
like
Which would be like, for example,
eh,
learning.
I mean, meditation, for instance, is a good example. I mean, that was one of the early studies that
Hmm.
showed, after a month of meditation, the brain changed.
Yeah.
So it's obviously going to happen. I mean, if you learn a musical instrument, your brain has to learn how to do that. It
Yeah.
doesn't just happen. And how does it become muscle memory? All of these things. It's because the brain changes. The circuits change to facilitate these functions. And
Yeah.
so again, they go hand in hand between
Hmm.
activity. I mean, I have some customers that call me up and say, "Hey, this thing really improved my deep sleep, but it's inconsistent from night to night." And I said, "Yeah." They say, "Some nights I sleep like a 20-year-old and some nights I sleep like a 50-year-old." And my response to them is, "Yeah, and I bet some days you're as active as a 20-year-old and some days you're as active as a 50-year-old." And they said, "Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but so what?" And I said, "Well, no, your body is telling your brain that you don't need as much deep sleep when you're inactive like that."
Oh, interesting. Okay. So, so you got to live the life, guys. You still got to do the work. You got to exercise and do all the stuff. Okay. Let's talk about this elusive technology because there's two pieces to the puzzle. No, three pieces. Well, two pieces to the two physical pieces and three pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting here is this isn't just a thing that you use at night. It's actually a thing you use during the day and then use at night. And there are different purposes on both sides.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it,
so
it really depends on what you want to do with it. And a lot of people look at this technology and it's the Soltec system. A lot of
mhm,
people look at it and they say, "Oh, this is for sleep." And I wish they would think of it as, no, it's for stress and sleep. And I would emphasize stress because as a physician, I'll tell you it's even more important.
mhm,
Okay. It's not that sleep's not important. Obviously it is, but it's easy to use this technology for sleep because all you have to do is turn it on. you know,
right.
and stress does take some time, but it doesn't have to be devoted entirely to this.
Mhm.
You can just do it while you're answering emails, for God's sakes.
Well, and if stress will keep you out of that sleep, I think even if you're using the technology, right? If
It
you're
can.
if you're completely wired going to bed,
Yes.
the tech's going to do what it can, but it's not going to be able to make up for the fact that you're completely wired. So when we're using the technology during the day, and you mentioned like the way I've used it is I've laid on my bed and just zoned out for half an hour. But part of the reason for that is because I was dealing with a significant amount of jet lag. So I had 5 hours of time to kind of
Make up.
convince my body we were coming back. We were back kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I used it with a different kind of intentionality, but the idea would be to is it building resilience in the system to help deal with stress during the day so that at night you're kind of capitalizing on that. You almost call it a workout,
Mhm.
like a stress workout during the day, so that at night you'll have better success with the device and the wearable talking to each other and helping you guide your brain in and out of these deep sleep cycles.
Yes, I mean you are correct, but the real reason is people don't even realize how stressed they are.
Sure.
I mean, and that's why they don't pay attention to it.
Hmm.
Because if I asked you, Nat, do you know what it's like to have absolutely zero stress? It's a tough question.
Well, I think I'd be dead. But I would say the closest to that would be being in a float tank.
Okay, that's a good
Right? That would
example.
be That would be the closest I would personally get to it, because the float tank is that thing where you get in, and I'm the kind of person that's like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Like, what the heck am I going to do for the next hour? I'm going to be so bored. At least the first couple times I did a float tank.
Mhm.
And so you lie down and you're like, oh, it's kind of wet, but it's not cold and it's not warm. And then the next thing you know, they're playing music and waking you up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And right. And so
Yeah.
you've gotten into a completely altered state. And I think that's the closest,
Yes.
because even in sleep, you're more active, you're dreaming, you're processing. And I have a sense that when you're in that float tank, I don't even know how much of that is actually happening.
Right. Right. In essence, what's happening is your physical body is relaxed. You're in a safe place. You're very relaxed. And if you can stop thinking at
Hmm.
that time, if you can just give it up, and just let go, then you'll become very relaxed. And it depends on how wired you were before you got in as to what
100%.
level of relaxation you're going to be able to achieve. But you're right. And having practiced this kind of stuff for the past 25 years, you know, I can get to a point where there's just no stress. But
Mm,
at the same point, I don't even feel my body. I mean, I'm consciously aware, there's no thought whatsoever, and my body is totally relaxed. And one of the interesting things I remember when we first took this into a sleep lab, the sleep medicine doc was watching these people on video, and he says, "None of these people are moving." You know? He says, "What are you doing to them?" And I said, "No, it's kind of the effect. I mean, they end up in a relaxed situation, and the body just sort of goes limp."
hmm,
And so that really helps with the stress reduction. But the other, and you've told me that you started to experience this right away, is there's a sensation that you're going to start to feel. And
hmm,
let's not dismiss the word feel. This is,
hmm.
I mean, I used to be a left brain kind of guy.
Sure.
Okay.
You're a neurologist.
Yeah.
Hardware.
Right. Exactly. And very little emotion. So not only, lack of, emotional feelings, but physical feelings were reduced as well. And so this whole concept of feeling is very, very interesting from the standpoint of not only emotions and compassion and relating to other people, but also from a physical standpoint. Because if you start thinking, you get out of your mind.
Hmm.
Okay. And then all of a sudden, your body can relax a lot more. But there's a feeling sense that you get with the Soltec system that is unique and can be expansive. And
Hmm.
that I learned to focus on that early on. And in the beginning, you kind of feel this tingling, sometimes warmth in your feet. But then, and the position of the unit is on the floor, under the bed or by the footboard,
Yep.
by your feet. So it's
Yep.
down there. And so you start to feel it there. And then gradually over time, it starts to creep up your legs. And usually by the time it hits your knees, you start to feel it in your hands.
Hmm.
And then, after a while, you start to feel it, further and further throughout the body until it's all body. And then what happens after that? And it really depends on what you allow and what your feeling nature is like. So for some
Right.
people, for me, it was a long time. Okay. But for some people, and women are better at this because, our culture allows for women to exhibit a stronger feeling nature.
Right.
Okay. Men
Yeah.
need to learn this. Okay. They're
Yeah.
deficient. And so it's really important to learn this feeling and have it then expand. And when you get into that state, you don't even feel your body anymore.
Hmm.
And that's a state of complete relaxation. And what's nice is the more you experience that, the more you can take that through the day. It's not the same extent that you would when you're using the equipment, but it's vastly different from how you were in the past without that experience.
So it's essentially like it is a meditation of sorts, but it's a very physical experience, as far as meditations go, or it can be. I think
right.
depending on how you're using it,
It
right? If you're
starts that
writing your
way.
email, yeah,
Right.
if you're writing emails and have your feet positioned over. And so let's actually, before I get into that, let's talk a little bit because people might be sitting there scratching their heads going, what the hell are they talking about? So the Soltec device itself is fairly heavy. It almost looks like a figure eight. It's solid and it has two metal balls on the top, which makes sense because, or visible, because these are magnets,
Yep.
right? Or
Yes, they're discs, right?
they're discs.
They're discs in an aluminum tube, and they spin at the frequencies we tell them to spin.
Right. So you're physically actually having a magnetic field at your feet that you're starting to experience through your body. And when we talk about the tingling and the warmth, just so you know, this is actually quite pleasant. This isn't it's not an itchy thing. It's actually a very pleasant physical experience. And I would say that, I mean, I've only used it once at night so far because we decided that I would wait until I was through my jet lag to allow the machine to calibrate to normal nat as opposed to,
Mhm.
you know, dysregulated nat. And I don't feel like I felt as much, but then I was asleep pretty fast. So,
Right. And
and
that's one of
yeah.
the reasons why we tell people, make sure in the first few days you're also using it for stress so that
Mhm.
you could realize what it feels like. And you're right. Are you going to feel it at night? No, because you become drowsy and then you go to sleep. You don't feel anything when you're asleep.
Yeah. And so, and then there's that interplay with the wearable, which is, it looks like a watch, but it's not a watch. You really only wear it at night. So just to be clear to all the people who already have a wearable of whatever kind, you don't have to wear another thing during the day here. This device that interplays with the Soltec. So there's the Z Tech
Or
and
Z
what's
track, Z
Z
track,
Track.
and yeah, and then the generator is called Z Gen for generator, and Z track
Okay.
is because it tracks your sleep so that it can tell Z Gen, the generator, what frequencies to use.
Perfect. Okay. So there's an interplay between the wearable and the device.
Yes,
And that's what basically is assistive. And this is where this wearable really kind of stands apart from every other wearable that we have is that this wearable actually will assist your body by interplaying with the Z-Gen in getting into that proper frequent or in a better frequency so that you can get into your deep sleep.
yes, that's precisely the case, and think of it as a closed loop feedback system.
Yeah.
So, Z track monitors and analyzes what your sleep stage is. And then in a fraction of a second, when a change is needed, it transmit a quick Bluetooth signal, to ZGen, and then it changes the protocol to essentially support that particular stage of sleep and hopefully, deepen and deepen and deepen your delta or deep sleep.
Right. And so I just had another question about this. It's jumped out of my mind. I probably didn't get enough deep sleep last night. Okay, so we're getting better deep sleep, and then during the day with the Z Gen, you can just, I mean, you'd basically either use it in your room if you have access to it, or when you come home for work or whatever the case may be, you might just sit and have your feet. Would you ever put your feet on top? Oh, I know what my question was. It was a good one too. Would you ever put your feet directly on the device, or you would always have them just close to it?
I think for a stress reduction session, if you want to, you can put your feet right on it.
You can.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's no need to, but if you
Hmm.
wanted to, I mean, for some people, they actually have one under their desk. So,
That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, because,
I don't think I'm going to be carrying it up and down the stairs.
no,
Ways enough
no.
that it'd make me think. I mean, it's carryable, it's doable, but
But yeah, it's not the kind of thing you do regularly. But I know some people that have it at work
hmm.
and they use it during the day, and they feel so much better. And when you're that much more relaxed, work is a lot easier.
100%.
You know,
Um, okay, so what about people, and here's where we're maybe going to get into a little bit more nitty gritty here. What about people who say they're very sensitive to EMFs?
yeah.
And I know we're going to get into a discussion now about the difference between magnetism and EMFs. But there's that Bluetooth thing. But you said it's intermittent. Like it's not constantly sending that signal. But what is it? Have you had experience with people who consider themselves or who are very sensitive to EMFs? Or have you had experience there? And
Yeah. Well, essentially, we've gone through a lot of testing, and the Bluetooth signal for the whole night, you might get 1 to 3 seconds of exposure.
wow,
Okay,
okay,
so that's
that's
pretty
tiny.
negligible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of EMF, the system does not produce EMF.
Hmm.
Okay, it's EMF is electromagnetism, and it's typically the EMF you're exposed to is, depending on where you live, 50, 60 hertz.
Right.
Okay, power lines, that kind of stuff. We don't operate anywhere near those frequencies. Our frequencies are deemed by the FDA to be safe and just, inconsequential entirely. So these frequencies are so low. And remember, these frequencies are produced by the Earth. So if you're worried about these frequencies, I call Elon and book a flight to Mars, because
Well, but the Earth's frequencies are said to be beneficial to us, right? Like the
exactly
Schumann
right,
frequency, like
right,
all of these frequencies are
are needed.
essentially what we've evolved
Yeah,
to 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 exist with and depend on, really, for proper.
balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we're not giving you anything that's abnormal.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and that's the key. And what we're doing is we're supporting the frequencies that affect these particular stages of sleep that your brain normally is acting at, and that's the entrainment effect, which is, I mean, that's why we think that it restores delta sleep, and to our knowledge, there is nothing that does that.
So I was going to ask that, is there any other technology out there that you're aware of that because there's headbands that, like, there's so many different, I mean, there's definitely a lot of devices that target the vagus nerve
Yeah.
as a way to try and get the nervous system to stand down, basically.
Right. But the vagus nerve doesn't entrain the brainstem to operate.
Hmm.
You're dealing with two different things.
Yeah.
Okay, there's vagus nerve is the outflow, okay, down to the body to affect the bodily organs. And I'm not sure that, targeting the vagus nerve is a little bit of a misnomer. The vagus nerve does not operate at a frequency of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, the vagus nerve fires and then transmit a signal that goes out goes down the nerves, and then it releases a chemical, okay, to the next nerve cell that has a particular function that manifests the parasympathetic division. All
Mm-hmm.
right, so and actually the frequency of peripheral nerves, and the vagus nerve is considered a peripheral nerve, is zero. It's just DC.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
You got to be careful, what people are saying versus, the real physiology. And now, vagus nerve also has a sensory component. That
Hmm.
sensory component goes back to the brainstem.
Right.
Okay, but going back to the brainstem is only providing feedback. It doesn't dictate what the brainstem is going to do. So
Right.
we actually are providing the resonant frequency, that supports the parasympathetic division, so that the outflow of the vagus nerve will be increased.
Interesting.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's the big difference. And
Hmm.
then remember also that the autonomic nervous system has northbound output to affect the thalamus, which affects the cortex, to manifest deep sleep. So you've got to do all that. The vagus nerve in and of itself doesn't impact sleep, okay? Because that's not northbound.
Hmm.
All right.
Well, I mean, there is that, there is all that talk about how the branches of the vagus nerve that go to the gut
Right.
are impacted by the microbiome and
Yes.
neurotransmitters in the gut and that piece of it. But your point is well taken in that this whole resonance piece, this whole piece of helping the brainstem or assisting the brainstem in resonating at a frequency that is going to be conducive to getting into that stage of sleep that we so desperately need,
Yeah.
there's really only one way to do that.
Yeah.
And you know, it's all of this is going to essentially affect the vagus nerve, and probably working on your vagus nerve is a good idea anyway.
Mhm.
But they're two different things.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. And, I think the simplest way to sort of characterize this is that the language of the nervous system is frequency based. Okay.
Hmm.
As each layer evolved, one on top of the other, higher frequencies developed to control more lower functions. And so, you got to the brainstem level and they had to have higher frequencies than the peripheral nerves, which essentially operated DC. Okay, that's why the lowest part of the autonomic nervous system is 0.003 cycles per second, just a
Yeah.
little bit higher than zero.
A little bit higher than nothing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you start to understand that concept, then you realize, hey, if I want a certain area of the nervous system to operate, I have to meet it where it normally, operates at.
Right. Right.
That's the key, and that's the secret of entrainment.
Hmm.
I have to give you the right frequency.
And so, is there a mechanism with this, with the device, where there's an interaction with someone on the other side that helps to calibrate the Z Gen to where the person needs to be? Like, or
Yeah.
does the machine automatically know where you are?
Z-Track figures that out,
Okay,
so
so
you don't have to
after
worry
using
about
it
it.
over a period of time, the machine will adjust itself to where you're at, kind of thing.
It goes through the first 5 nights to figure out roughly the range, and
Okay.
then it gets to a pretty small range, but then it keeps checking.
I was going to ask, does it recalibrate over? Because you're hopefully the hope is that you evolve, like
Right.
you get
Well,
better.
not only that, but let's face it, I mean, we're all going to go through stressful times,
Hmm.
and so you want to adapt to lower frequencies, and then it can adapt to higher frequencies. So it goes through a regular cycle. Every 12 days it may make an adjustment, depending on, where you're at. So
The settings.
it has this
Hmm.
fine tuning mechanism that's checking you, and it measures, we have a parameter that we've created that looks at a part of the autonomic nervous system that we found to be most reliable at determining what works best.
Hmm.
Okay. And
Hmm.
so we're checking that every night, and we basically, it's 2 nights this frequency, 2 nights that, and we oscillate that 6 times, and then we see at the end, okay, is there a difference? And depending on how big that difference is, we make an adjustment, and then we test again.
Nice.
Okay.
Love it. So, do you have are there any stories of users that really stand out for you using this technology that you would be able to share without obviously identifying
Yeah,
anyone?
I think I mean, I've got to be careful here because, you know, this technology has effects that we've seen that have had very beneficial effects on medical conditions. Okay.
Okay,
Okay. So, and they're the most remarkable ones.
sure.
All right. Because now we are talking to the FDA and we are working towards getting claims for these kinds of conditions. All right. So ultimately we will be able to talk about these things, but right now
You're
we
not right now.
can't. Right.
Okay,
And
fair
so
enough.
these are side benefits that are
Hmm.
happening, and
Hmm.
we've seen an array of them, um, and we've seen the same kind of thing with using it for stress, because again, why did we start this whole venture? We started it to treat stress, to alleviate stress related conditions. That was the whole
Hmm.
goal.
Hmm.
And so that's actually what I'm most proud of, is the people that use it for stress that all of a sudden get better. And so one of our employees, you
Okay.
know, he uses it at night, and he sleeps better, but he also uses it during the day when he needs to. And he's got an issue with gout, for
Mm.
instance. And I didn't realize gout was a stress related condition.
Well, to your point earlier in this conversation, what isn't?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a physiological piece to gout. Obviously, there's, an excess of purines or an inability to process certain things. There's the uric acid crystals that embed themselves in the joint, like
Right.
all the things. And we'd be foolish to think that the energy of the system is not going to affect that.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of a sudden, and he was suffering from stress. And so he wasn't doing this for his gout, but his gout cleared up. He was on every medication and this and that. And this was remarkable. He even cheats on his diet. You know, now I probably shouldn't be talking about this, but gout's not a very prevalent condition. So, you know, I feel like I'm not giving
I
away
think
that
it's
much.
around. I think it's around more than people think.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, I can think of 3 people I know who have it and
Yeah.
have to use medication to control it, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if anybody's ever looked at a diet to control gout. I don't know. I think there's 3 things you can eat.
Mhm.
It's it's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. But if you think about the effect that deep sleep has on the immune system,
Exactly.
it's like, whoa. I mean, you're talking about big time problems,
Hmm.
and should this thing be used for a whole variety of things? And if you're not going to use it, I mean, this is what I do. That because I would have the same problem. Would I use it during the day? I can't find the time.
Right.
So what I do is um, I use it after I wake up. I'll
Oh,
roll
interesting. To set
over.
up your day.
Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
I
Okay.
roll over and I turn it off and I said, all right, I slept enough. I'm awake. Now I turn it on and I do a sleep session, or I'm sorry, a
A
relaxation
relaxation
session.
session.
Yeah.
What about doing the relaxation session before going to sleep?
Well, I think that's fine. Here's the
Except
problem.
you'll fall asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But okay, but here we got to fix for that. We've had too many complaints about that. So,
Right? What's
so
the hack? Give it
right.
to us.
So here's the hack. The hack is we've decided to build in a way to automatically run a stress reduction session and have it then immediately go into a sleep session if that's what you choose.
Oh, well, there we go.
Right.
Okay. There's a hack for that. Because I can see myself probably quite often
Yeah.
going that route.
Doing that. Yeah.
Just because judging by the way my days, unless I carry it down the stairs and bring it into my office, which is not out of the question. It could just be part of my, you know, exercise snack during the day.
Right. Right. But yeah, I think that's a good idea. Would I use it to relax at night? I probably would if I misbehaved in terms of my sleep hygiene.
Right.
Okay. If I behave, I fall asleep right away.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and I think people, let's cover a couple basic tips that I think are really
Hmm.
helpful that a lot of people ignore. And that is if you know how long you typically sleep, make sure you provide enough time so that you can sleep that long that
Hmm.
makes you feel good. And a lot of people don't. They say, well, I'll just be short on sleep. And you can get away with it when you're very young, but the older you get, the worse of a problem you cause for yourself.
Yeah.
So, that's one. Another is it's really surprising about going to bed at the same time,
Yes.
every night. That
100%.
because that sets up your sleep cycles to be the way that your body wants it to be. All
Hmm.
right. So that's really important. And another thing I do, or I should say I try to do, is if I know when I should go to sleep, I get ready for sleep about a half an hour to an hour before
Sure.
so that I know, okay, you're all ready for sleep. So all you have to do is get upstairs and just jump in bed,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
don't
We
have to
fight
turn on
sleep,
the
right?
bathroom lights. Right.
Yeah. I actually have a red light panel in my bathroom, and that's my light that I use at night when I'm getting ready for bed.
Okay.
Um,
You're cutting out right now.
oh, sorry. No, I have a red light panel in my bathroom, and that's the light I use to get ready for bed. So, because I literally I think at this stage of the game, if I turned on a bright light as I'm getting ready for bed, I find it actually hurts my eyes. So
Absolutely.
it's a little bit, my body knows that part of our routine for getting ready, and if you think about it, we do this with our babies. right? We have a routine every night. We have a bath, we read a story, we do this, whatever it is that you do to help your child kind of unwind and get ready for bed. The tragedy is that as adults, we kind of need a routine. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but if you can find someone who gives you a bath and reads you a story and tucks you in, that might help your sleep too.
Absolutely.
Um, what about staying asleep? Like, so there's different problems with sleep, right? So you have the people who struggle to fall asleep, and I think certainly with this device, with the sleep hygiene and the device, there's a possibility that there's going to be that help is on the way, right? Helping whether you're using the relaxation cycle ahead of time or not, having a device that's trying to help to entrain your brain into that place where you can go to sleep is going to be assistive in a way that's quite different than anything anybody has experienced. But what about those people that wake up in the night and can't seem to get back to sleep? Have you seen, I mean, maybe a better question is, have you seen that it can be helpful for some people in that instance?
Yeah, what we do is during the night when we see that somebody has awakened,
Hmm.
we change the protocol to what we call back to sleep.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. And the machine's programmed to do that through the
Oh yeah.
wearable.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we found that that helps. Is it perfect? No. And the reason it's not perfect is because a lot of times people will wake up and they'll decide, well, I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to start working or doing things like that. Or
And pick up my phone. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
or I've decided I'm going to read, and then they get into the book.
Yeah.
You
Exactly.
know? And it's
Exactly.
like, sorry, the equipment can't solve that problem.
Well,
You
and you've
know,
turned on the light.
yeah, yeah, or you're reading from something that has light emitting from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's those kinds of issues. Um, what what I've found for a lot of people is that if they're patient, it'll put them back to sleep, and then they'll sleep another block. And so
Mm,
there will, well, first of all, there's a lot of people that will get up just to go to the bathroom as they get
sure.
older. Okay. And so it's really nice to be able to come back and then fall asleep. So for a lot of people, they'll sleep in a couple of blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They'll sleep for 3-4 hours, go to the bathroom, get back into bed, sleep for another 3-4 hours. And that's really ideal
I
when you
do
think
that.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I
And
have like
so,
all these supplements I take before bed. I keep meaning to take earlier, but I don't. So, you know,
hmm hmm right. Well, and it's something that does happen with age, where
sure.
people have more awakenings in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's allowing yourself to fall back to sleep. And fortunately, the device assists in that process.
Okay. That's fantastic. Um, what, so there was that other piece of the puzzle we were going to talk about a little bit, but I feel like we've kind of covered a lot of ground here, but
Yeah.
maybe we want to talk tiny bit, touch on the whole energetic piece about chakras and get into a bit more of the esoteric piece of the puzzle here. Like we've talked about tangible stress that people might be experiencing. We've talked about the hardware of the brain, the software of the mind. We talked about resonance and all that. In the older traditions of healthcare, like the Ayurvedic and the traditional Chinese medicine, there's an acknowledgement of the energetic fields in the body. And
Yeah.
because we're dealing with magnets here, we're definitely in a world where we can start to think about might this be impacting those energetic fields. And we talked about it a little bit the other day, and I was wanting to share a little bit of this with the audience because I do think that when we're really looking to move the needle on physical issues with our meat suit or our bodies, whatever you want to talk to it, it's becoming increasingly apparent to me and to so many other people that there's a much more amorphous piece of the puzzle. Anybody who's had acupuncture, for example, anybody who's experienced energy work like Reiki or whatever the case may be, you'd have to be nuts to deny that there's any connection here. And so I know that you've thought about and talk about a lot where this technology kind of is assistive or helps in that area with the body. And so I thought we might spend just a couple of minutes at the end of the podcast talking about that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this has been an area of interest for me because you can't help but feel this energy after a while throughout your body, and you say, well, wait a minute, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately for me, we ended up with a lot of experimental groups early in the process of developing, this and related technologies. And some of these people, had the ability to perceive these energies at various levels and various degrees of sophistication. And I don't have that capability. But these people were telling me what they were looking at and what they were perceiving, and I was like, whoa, okay. and the other thing that was happening was, as various people from different Asian cultures would come across this technology, they would say, well, if you go into Asia, you better be prepared to manufacture millions of these units, because of the energetic practices there, whether it's chi, or
Mm-hmm.
the
Like
different
qigong.
Ayurvedic
Yeah.
ones. Or yeah, I mean, you look at that, and this, you know in the process of doing this work, when we realized what we had, we found this incredible patent firm that worked with our existing patent firm. And this person says, I'll only take you on as a client if you sign up for 6 months of engineering research on this. And I said, sure, we'll do it, given your reputation. And so he worked on it, and he said, is there an experiment you want us to do? And I outlined the experiment. I won't go through the details, but the last stage of the experiment, he basically said, well, he says, I know the answer to that. And I knew the answer to the first two. And he told me his answer. I said, no, you're not going to find that based upon what our observers have seen. And he says, no, that can't be. That violates the laws of physics. And sure enough, he said, I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'll call you back tomorrow afternoon. He didn't call me for 10 days because he did the experiment 3 times, and then he called me up. He says, what the hell is happening here?
And so what was the experiment measuring? Can you,
Well,
without going into too deep into the weeds, because then we'll be here for another hour.
yeah, we were essentially measuring the magnetic field around ZGen, the generator, and when you hit this particular frequency, the magnetic field should have dropped, but when there was a person there, that it interacted with, it doubled. And
Mm.
it's this relationship between the human energy system and this magnetic field at these particular frequencies. And those are the same frequencies that with time people start to experience. And so clearly we had scientific evidence, hardcore measurements, that nobody could deny that, wait a minute, there's something here. It's not only coupled to what individuals can feel, but it's also coupled to what, gifted individuals can perceive. And
Hmm.
so, I don't care who you are, it becomes difficult to start denying these facts. And even NIH has coined the phrase biofield in
Yeah.
recognition that, hey, you know what? This stuff that the Asian cultures are talking about, it's real. But
Yeah.
it's not something that's commonly practiced in the US. It's not part of mainstream. I should say it's becoming more and more common.
Yeah, and I think that that piece of the puzzle, which is harder to quantify, harder to, certainly in our left brain Western world, as it were, um, all those case studies that you can't share yet because it would be making claims. You're getting to a place where, is it possible that energetically the body's energy systems are being restored so that the body can do the work to do the repair that needs to be done, right?
Well, yeah.
It's not, I mean, sleep is a big piece of it, not denying that. Stress management is a big piece of it, but it sounds to me that if you have enough of these case studies where big issues, big physiological issues were being addressed, not to use the wrong word, there's got to be something more to it. And this whole rebalancing the energetic systems in a human body, I think, can kind of open the door to the body saying, oh yeah, we know how to take care of that. I got it.
Well, I mean, essentially, what you've just said is what the gifted observers are saying.
Mm,
That's exactly what they're seeing. They're seeing, wait a minute, you're not necessarily fixing just the body. You're changing the dynamics of the energy system, which then interrelates with the body and causes a level of healing. So it's the same thing with body, with Reiki, with
hmm.
energetic work,
Yeah.
and
Even
so
acupuncture work is
yeah,
working on energy meridians, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, there's a woman who was using our technology, or she still is, and she started to feel the energy moving up her legs and this and that, and it stopped when it got to the top of her legs, and she couldn't figure out why. And she talked to me, and I took a little bit of a history, and I said, well, what's happened, in your pelvis? And she said, well, I've had 3 C-sections, and then I had to have a hysterectomy. I said,
Trauma.
oh, okay. And I said, well, just encourage that feeling to continue up. And sure enough, she called me about 2 weeks later. She says, guess what? I can feel it now throughout all of that area, and it's spreading throughout my body. So some would say, I mean, my gifted observers would say, yes, she had an energetic block.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I mean, and that gets into a whole other kind of esoteric area, but I think that it's important to acknowledge that it's there.
yeah,
But I also think that what you don't need to you don't need to buy into that piece of the puzzle.
yeah.
There's so much hard science, and it's such an interesting way of addressing the that relationship between stress and sleep, and actually helping the brain to get into that state where you can experience sleep the way that you used to when you maybe were a little less stressed and
Yes.
and a little bit younger in the world. So,
Well,
Dan, how can people learn more about the Soltec system? Where can they find you? Where do people go from here who want to learn more?
well, the best place is probably the website, and it's Soltec Health, and that's Soltec. That's Soltec. So there's not an H at the end of that, but then there's health. So
Oh,
there's
so
an
it looks like
H
Soltec.
there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 So it's SoltecHealth.com. So SoltecHealth.com.
Great. And it's a great website, actually, guys. There's lots of really good information over there. And I know that you've got people that people can interact with if they have questions.
Yeah.
And we do, for the listeners of the podcast, we have a code longevity, which will help you to knock a couple bucks off the price if you're ready to take the jump. And I'll be reporting back. So, guys, I've just started with the technology myself. I've spoken to enough people that I'm like, okay, we need to dig into this. This is unique enough. And the person who referred you to me, actually, Thaddeus, um, is someone that I have a very high regard for and a lot of respect for. So if
Yeah.
Thaddeus is going to bring me something, I'm going to pay attention.
Yeah.
So I'll be doing I'll be recording a solo episode down the road, um,
Yeah.
and reporting back about what my experience has been with the technology.
Yeah. And Thaddeus, I believe, has been using it for like 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
he's got a lot of experience with it.
Yeah. So maybe Thaddeus and I'll do a little, he'll come on my solo episode and
Sure.
I'll throw some stuff at him. And well,
There you go.
but I would say already in the first 5 days, there's definitely, I don't have the tingles all over, but I got them in my feet. So we'll see
Yeah.
how far we go.
Oh, it's something that occurs naturally. And then after that, then allow yourself to expand, because then that's when, the body just goes away. And
Yeah.
that's when you hit a level of relaxation that you probably never achieved before, other than maybe in a float tank,
Well, and then I
but
don't have to go to the float tank, which is amazing because that water gets in my ears. My ears are blocked for days. It's a nightmare.
yeah.
Anyway, Dan, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you over the last little while, and I'm looking forward to see all the exciting things that happen with Soltec down the road, and all the stuff and all the people you're going to help. That
Yeah.
on top of the people you've already helped.
Well,
Thank
it
you
was
so much.
very nice to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you.